Hello, Terry. Hello, Kim.
Hi, Rushmore. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
I'm
So I
sorry.
think,
I don't know how to make my name appear to be my full name.
oh, I am not in control of that, so I'll punt that question. You like your full name? And
Right. I have a feeling there's a setting somewhere in Zoom for me to do that, but I don't
Yeah.
know where that is.
Hmm.
We can rename you. That's not a problem. Do you
All
just
right. Well, but you don't want to have to do that every time. So I will Google it and see if Google can help me.
I believe if you go to the participant list, let me see. Yeah, if you click on participants and then on the right by your name, there's more. You can click on rename. There we go. Yeah.
Excellent.
Voila.
so we're waiting for a couple more. Kim, can I ask you now, and I think it's apparent, you go by Kim rather than Kimberly, is that right?
Yeah, Kim works fine.
Okay. And Diego, I know you said that we had a quorum in a previous email. Was there any indication that someone would not be calling in?
No, we got a response from everyone but Jim Vitale.
Okay.
I believe maybe Jim emailed me separately, but I believe he's intending to be here. Yes.
You do currently have a quorum, so we can wait a bit for all members, or you can go ahead and start. You have 3 out of your 5.
Okay. Well, we're 5 minutes in, so given that this meeting might have quite a lot of discussion.
Oh, there's Amy. Good.
Hi.
Hi,
Hello.
Amy.
Nice to meet you.
You too.
I think I've seen your face before.
I will send Jim an email, Terry,
Okay.
just to verify.
Give him just another minute here. Okay, I think we should just go ahead and get started here, and Jim can catch up when he gets online. Nikki, did you get any response?
Not so far, but I just sent it probably like 30 seconds ago.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and he can catch up as we go along here. So I will call the meeting to order here at 3:07 p.m. Thanks everybody for making time for this today. And it's nice to have almost everyone gathered for this premiere, this first meeting of the CFD Committee. I'm going to start with a roll call. We'll do it alphabetically. And Member Cervantes.
Present.
And Member Kinney.
Here.
And Kim, I am saying your last name right. Is that correct, Kinney?
Yes.
Okay, good. Member Leifer.
Yes, here.
Thank you. And then Mr. Vitale is his last name. We will wait for him to arrive. So the first order of business after the roll call is to approve any reordering of the agenda items. So does anyone want to add or change the items that we have for our business today? And
I have no change.
We will, if I could get a motion to adopt the agenda as it is. I'm going to
move.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
motion carries. Thank you. And Diego, do we have any public comment on any non-agenda items for this meeting?
I checked the email and our form maybe 5 minutes ago, and we don't have any.
Okay.
And we currently don't have any on our YouTube live either.
Okay, great. So that takes us really kind of speed down the agenda a little bit. The first thing that we will talk about, the minutes have been approved in the consent. Well, actually, I should do the motion to approve the consent calendar. It's got the minutes from the last 2 meetings in there. So can I get a motion to approve that consent calendar?
Jim, just a quick, sorry, Terry, just a quick question on the special presentation. That's just we're approving we already approved the agenda, and now we're approving the consent calendar, but those are, we're consenting on the minutes. We don't typically consent or vote on a presentation, do we? This is just a presentation by staff, correct?
Yeah, that should stand apart.
It should. I mean, I'm fine moving forward with it because we'll have. I'm sure there'll be questions, but there's really nothing to vote on. I'm fine with this, but just for procedural purposes, it really should just be the minutes, and then there's a presentation by staff that should not be under necessary consent calendar.
So the motion that we have now is to approve the minutes from the previous meeting, right?
Yes, that's how it should be.
So,
and I've reviewed the minutes tonight. For Kim and Amy's sake, it's just Terry and I, so I have no changes to either of the minutes. I think they encapsulate both meetings.
okay, so the motion's been made, and I believe we had a second. So all in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Okay, those minutes are approved. And we will have the special presentation, which Diego, I believe, is the one that you're going to give. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. And I did want to let you both know that we've, for whatever reason, just had special presentations under consent calendar for a long time now, but Diego and I are going to change that moving forward. There'll be a separate section on both the regular Board of Trustees as well as the standing committees.
Since this is a standing committee, I am, interested in trying to keep it procedurally as precise as possible. So we'll get used to this as time goes on. So with that, I will turn it over to Diego for a brief presentation about standing committees and the Brown Act and so on that we thought would be appropriate for the new members.
Okay, thank you. And that's correct. We'll move forward with making sure that the special presentation is not on the consent calendar as well. And Nikki, you can do me a favor and check in with Jim Vitale. He just called and he was having trouble joining through the Zoom link. So I'll go ahead with the presentation while Nikki helps Jim.
Okay.
I'll take care of that.
Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen for the presentation. And you all can see the presentation, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So as we discussed, we wanted to have a presentation for you all regarding what a standing committee is and a bit more of the Brown Act overview, given that this is a new standing committee for the Altadena Library's Board of Trustees. So we'll go ahead and get started. Again, the agenda for this presentation is really two main purposes. Is one, give you all some basics on the Brown Act, some history, what a legislative body is, what constitutes a meeting, and how to make sure that we have appropriate agendas and allow for public participation. And then as well as Nikki and I's staff roles in terms of supporting this committee as well as the Board of Trustees. So some history on the Brown Act. The Brown Act was adopted in 1953, and it was really meant to safeguard the public's right to access and to participate in local government meetings. So as I highlighted in the blue text, all meetings of a legislative body, of a local agency, for us, it's the Board of Trustees, and all the should be open and public, and everyone should be able to and permitted to attend any meeting of that body, unless it's otherwise put into their chapter or their bylaws. And that's not necessarily common. Again, legislative bodies, in terms of the Brown Act, should be conducting their affairs as transparently as possible. The metaphor here is as if you were working in a house of glass. And then here on their slide, I wanted to give you all some information as to where directly in our government code the Brown Act can be found. And as you'll see throughout the presentation, there'll be some notations as to where you can read further from the most latest guidance on the Brown Act. So the intent of the Brown Act, as I mentioned, is to keep deliberations and actions of legislative bodies open and public. So we're trying to make sure that we have meaningful public access to local government decisions. And we're trying to make sure that all meetings are open to the public, held on a regular schedule, and have a notice agenda. So in essence, there's no secret vote. If the public would like to be a part of the conversation, they can be.
Diego?
Yes.
I don't think I'm a host. Can you let Jim in?
Yes.
Sorry to
One
interrupt.
second. No problem. Yes, he's now in.
Okay, so you should be.
Okay, it says that he's already in now. So to continue, our legislative bodies are the ones that need to comply, right? So what constitutes a legislative body is a governing body and any subsidiary bodies. So that's any board, committee, anything that is established by a formal governing body in terms of for advisory, whether that's done through a charter, ordinance, resolution, or a formal action. So for example, the Board of Trustees by action created this standing body for the Community Facilities District. So for standing bodies, it has the same kind of requirements in terms of notices and agendas as their parent body. So again, as its the Board of Trustees. And one of the main components of a standing body is that it has to constitute less than a quorum of the parent body. So our Board of Trustees, there's 5 trustees, so less than a quorum is 2. Other board members, so for example, any other board member that's not on this committee could join a meeting. However, they need to attend solely as passive and neutral observers. And this is very unusual. And the reason for that is because, as you see in the subsequent bullet points, it's very hard for a person to attend without kind of providing body language or any kind of signaling that might be construed as communication to the board or the committee. And they're not allowed to ask questions. So because of this, it's not very common for board members that are not part of the committee to attend the meeting. So in terms of a meeting, the Brown Act applies for when there's a congregation of the majority of the members of that legislative body. So in our example, our committee is of 5 people. So you can congregate, have discussion, and make action as long as 3 of you are in attendance. So it needs to happen in the same time and place, place being a bit open given our new ordinances, given our COVID-19 guidances. They're allowed to hear, discuss, and deliberate, and focus on agency business. And this can be, as you all are much aware through the Zoom, is that it could be used by technology, but it also can be done via email or phone. So those as long as the majorities of the board members are present or in the discussion, it is considered a Brown Act meeting. And there will be a bit more on that later in the slides. Again, the meeting requires quorum, so a minimum of 3 for a 5-member committee to start business. When, and there's a typo on the presentation, I'm sorry about that. So the meeting is, when does the Brown Act not apply? So that happens when you are having individual contact or conversations, conferences open to the public, anything that's open or publicized community meetings. So for example, if you all decide to go to your local city council or to the board of supervisors, those are open meetings. So they don't constitute Brown Act in terms of your committee. Other legislative bodies or any even social or ceremonial events. So if you attended, all the committee members attended a social here at the library, that would not constitute a Brown Act meeting, even though the majority or a quorum is present. All of this is, again, as long as there's no discussion on agency business, unless it's part of an agenda that's public. To continue with that, about making sure that we follow Brown Act procedures in terms of meetings, understanding what serial meetings are. So part of the reason you can receive communication from staff in a BCC format is to avoid breaking the Brown Act through email. So making sure that we don't reply all. So BCC is a protective measure that we do so that you aren't put in that position. As well as daisy chain, where a member may contact a member B, and then that member also contacts member C to have discussions or share opinions about their positions on any kind of action or discussion that's going to happen at the next public meeting. And then hub exposed and spoke, meaning that either staff or someone connects and shares opinions of the committee with each other. So again, there's a bit more further reading, but in essence, we're trying to make sure that any discussion and meeting that has impact on decisions of this committee, that they're done open and publicly. What we would make sure that we want to make sure that there's not that kind of breakage of the Brown Act is making ourselves aware what collective briefings. So making sure that a quorum is not together when any briefing happens by staff. So making sure that we don't have a quorum. Retreats or workshops. So those are not normally part of the Brown Act unless there's discussions about long-term agency planning or team building. So anything that may constitute or have effects on decision-making in the future, that needs to be, at least that portion needs to be open to the public. And lastly, as informal gatherings. So any kind of pre or post meeting gatherings, it happens more often in person, but making sure that you don't discuss agency business while not in an open forum. So there's three main types of meetings. We have regular meetings that should be have agendas posted publicly accessible 72 hours before the meeting. That way we have plenty of notice to our public as to what will be discussed and when and how they can join the conversation. There's instances that there's a need for special meetings. So that can be called by either the chair of the committee or a majority of the board members or committee members. And that has a minimum of 24 hours notice before meeting. And you need to notify all board members in writing. And if possible, check in with media or try to spread the word to our community, to the public as soon as possible. And then there's emergency meetings that don't have any kind of requirements in terms of needing to post at a certain time. It's best practice to do so the same way you would do a special meeting. But if it's a true emergency, it may be possible that you not post or notify the community until an hour before. So a minimum of 1 hour notices is required for those. And those tend to be for health or safety emergencies, not something that couldn't require or be considered a special meeting. In terms of quorum, you all were experiencing that this earlier today. We were trying to discuss could we start the meeting? And so in terms of quorum, it's pretty clear in terms of what can be allowed. So for example, if today we started with 5 members and we have the full committee, but someone needs to step out and we lost quorum, we would need to, it would typically be the responsibility of the chair or the presiding member to end the meeting. That's what we would consider legally ending the meeting due to a lack of quorum. There could be special cases in which you continue to talk or have discussions, but you would not be able to make any action. And that, again, would be a case-by-case consideration of the committee and the necessity for discussion. And you can't, if we had not started the meeting and we don't have quorum, we wouldn't necessarily be allowed to have a meeting under the Brown Act. And we would only be able to receive public comment and do, for example, like this special presentation or have any discussion that could lead to action. Okay. In terms of notices or the agenda and public participation requirements, all meetings, regardless of the type, need to be noticed and have an agenda available. Usually that happens at the same time, but those are 2 separate requirements. They have to be open and to the public. So as of now, we are allowing people to participate through our live YouTube and in person as well. There needs to be reasonable accommodations for people. So there shouldn't be any conditions for attendance. So no need to require to sign in or charge, things like that. Like I mentioned, it has to be accessible, so reasonable accommodations. It needs to be held in a facility that doesn't prohibit attendance. If we do video and audio recording like we are currently, we must allow those to happen. If this were in person as well, we would not want to discourage our public to do video or audio recording. And most recently, voting requirements in terms of the committees and the board. We must report how each individual officially voted for every action in the minutes. So something to look out for when reviewing your meeting minutes, which is our next slide. The Brown Act doesn't require per se minutes in terms of detailed minutes as to what happened. However, it does require to report on actions taken, meaning that any motions, seconds, and the actual vote for the motion needs to be documented for the public. As to how that procedure goes, the Brown Act is pretty open and allows bodies to decide to what level and what extent they would like to have their minutes available. In terms of agendas, again, we want to post in a location that's accessible to everyone 24/7. So that includes both physically and on our website. It must be clear on the time and place and some general description as to what the business will be. So making sure that we have all the agenda items very clearly notated. And if there's any reason or any items that will be discussed in closed session. And basically we want to make sure that people have enough information to decide whether they are wanting or willing to attend the meeting. In terms of items not on the agenda, this is where public comment is very important. No actions can be taken by a committee or a governing board unless a majority decides is there, or a majority decides that it's an emergency situation. It could also be done if 2/3 of the members are present and vote that the immediate action is needed and that it goes to the board's attention. And then lastly, that when an item appeared on the agenda or has continued from a meeting that was held less than 5 days ago, which is not very common. In terms of general public comment, you as a committee are allowed to receive and respond briefly to statement and questions from public comments. You may refer to staff to respond during the meeting. So you may direct either Nikki or I or any other staff member that's present to respond to a question, as well as requests that we report back or place it on a future agenda for you all. And you can briefly announce what you as a member are doing in terms of your own activities for the committee. In terms of the rights for the public, they are allowed to address the board on any matters on the agenda. So before or during the consideration of the item, other matters within your jurisdiction. So even if they're not on the agenda, but they are within your jurisdiction to take action, you may listen to those and you may respond, as we mentioned before, but no action can be done on a non-agenda item. We cannot prohibit public criticism of the agency or the governing body, but we can take some discretion in terms of if public comment does become a personal attack, those cannot be permitted. And you as a committee and a board can decide to put reasonable time limitations for public comments. So if we have an agenda that's pretty long, you can decide to make public comments no more than 3 minutes, no more than 2 minutes, whatever is appropriate for you all. And then in terms of public record access, all agenda meeting minutes, handouts, anything that the board reviews and discusses are public records, and we need to document them as the part of the agenda items, but also make them publicly available. And in this case, posting on our website is completely fine. They are, as long as we allow people to request for physical copies if needed. So we're almost done. I wanted to just to end this meeting or presentation with what our staff liaison roles are. So as staff, we're responsible for maintaining a working relationship with you all and the chair, coordinating meeting notifications. So you'll get a lot of emails and notifications from me about meetings coming up, things that we need for the next public meeting, things like that. Provide and assist the advisory body with tools to stay on track, focus on their role. So that's something that will be discussed later during this meeting, as well as serve as a communication link with other bodies, right? You all are a standing committee, so you all will want and need information from our library departments, the foundation, the board of trustees, the Friends of the Library, and if through administrative procedures, the Los Angeles County Clerk. And as well, we provide guidance, we provide recommendations, support you in research or any kind of report writing and things that you may need. And people that are currently assigned to you for that are Nikki and I added those to the presentation so that you all had our contact information, so that if you had any questions or needed assistance, you knew who to reach out to. Again, I want to end with some helpful resources, especially since this is a new standing committee. It may be helpful to go over some of the Brown Act resources, but also some of our Altadena Library District resources, most importantly, our board website, as well as our Board of Trustees handbook, which is geared directly to the Board of Trustees, but given that you are a standing committee of them, it has a lot of information that is pertaining to you and this committee, as well as our strategic plan. So definitely those are some resources to look over. And if you have any questions or would like to check in after the meeting, we're more than happy to assist you all in that. And that's it. Thank you for your time.
Are there any questions from the members?
I actually have two questions. I'm curious what would constitute a closed session? That's question one. And the second one is, what time limits does the Board of Trustees typically have for public comment? And should we adopt a similar length of time for public comment for this committee?
Yes, I can answer the first one, which was what constitutes a closed session. Typically, in terms of the Brown Act, governing bodies are allowed to conduct business in closed session for human resources or employee discussions. So that might be hiring or letting go or transitioning someone from their employee. It could also be regarding litigation, things that need to be held in closed session until they're ready to be public, especially if it can affect litigation. And there's a few others, things like that. But at the end of the day, closed session can happen for any business that requires privacy on that part. However, no matter what discussion is done, at the end of that closed session and opening of open session, the board or the committee needs to provide a kind of an overview of, or at least an action as to what was taken, whether, and if there was an action taken. Actions tend to end up being part of the public record. In terms of the timing, Nikki, I'm not sure if I haven't had a chance to see.
Yeah, we allow up to 3 minutes for public comment, and we would adopt the same thing with this standing committee as well.
That
Thank
explains
you.
the 3 minutes we gave all of you at the last meeting to talk about yourselves.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
Sure.
Okay. From a need to know standpoint, at what point is it determined that need to know information cannot be shared with other community members, but only has to go through you for determination as to how it would be disseminated?
Can you provide an example of what
yes.
you mean?
An example?
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to determining scope of responsibility and who makes determinations as to what is acceptable or not acceptable, actions to take in a given set of circumstances. Let's say it has to do with fiscal issues and whether or not we can have a discussion about acceptance or not acceptance of a contract or a change order or a modification of budget.
Pretty much most decisions have to happen open and publicly. So, you know, be it if it comes through the CFD committee or the Board of Trustees. I do know that when we're dealing with contracting, as long as a contract is going to be $10,000 or more, all of that has to run through the Board of Trustees. When we get down the road into construction, our capital project management firm, I believe, will report back to Possibly the CFD committee, depending on if it's truly like financially related, but probably to the full board of trustees each month on progress towards the projects. I don't know if that's kind of what you're talking about.
It may be premature to be discussing this at this time, but when it comes down to entering into a contract for construction related services for the library, prior to that, in the general conditions for that contract, we can insert certain things that minimize or control the change orders in a manner that keeps it within certain boundaries.
So basically to that, any contract that we go into with, you know, architectural and design firm or a construction firm, all of that will have to run through the board of trustees. So again, like we'll have to provide the contract or the professional services agreement for review ahead of time. So if those are things that we don't feel like we've included, then of course the board can suggest that we add those types of clauses. But again, like that's why we're in the process right now of hiring the capital project management firm to make sure that all of those things are built into the contracts that we're entering in.
Okay, but drafts of their recommendations for inclusion within the contract are something that the committee will be able to review before it's passed on to the board of trustees?
I don't know that this committee would have oversight of the firms that are hired for the building projects. Is that
not the firms, the contractual terms once you've made a determination as to who to hire?
I believe those would go to the full board of trustees.
But the committee's role is a fiduciary role to protect the expenditure of the funds. And in the course of doing so, if it is determined that the manner in which the contract has been written does not address what would be an acceptable procedure for change orders and the pricing of those change orders is of concern to me.
Okay.
I mean, we can go ahead and acknowledge that in advance there will be change orders possibly due to unknown conditions or things of that nature there, but we're also in a position to control any add-on costs, overhead and profit on those change orders if we have got language in there that says that the change order will be based on actual cost of materials and labor and an addition of 10 or 15%, but no more. Mm-hmm. And we would review those in advance to make sure that the hours or the manpower that they're saying that they're going to use is in fact reasonable given the nature of the change order. And obviously our architect would be, working with us as well on that. I just want to make sure that we have that sort of critical language because it will minimize a lot of discussion down the line and facilitate the rapidity with which we can respond to change orders, I believe.
Yeah, Jim, this is Terry. I think what will happen, from a practical point of view is that we're in the process now, we're beginning the process of assembling a team of consultants and professionals that would help us through. In fact, today, we'll talk about the first two that we need to help us guide this committee through, because I think all of us have an idea of what to do, but none of us have the specifics when it comes down to executing, all these different laws and regulations that we have to obey going forward from here. So today, for example, we're going to talk about municipal services advisors and bond counsels and so on. So,
sure.
And those are the first two that we would like to get in place for the team that we're trying to build. We will get reports from them. We will get advice from them, et cetera. And I think a lot of what their comments are will guide how we need to move practically. Right now, I don't think there's a lot of overlap between what we're doing, setting up the structure of the CFD, and what a project manager would do regarding change orders and things like that. In fact, a project manager is one of the first things on the plate. Nikki, tell me if I'm wrong here, for our entire board, and the selection of that project manager will be guided in large part from the facilities committee. So there's these parallel things happening, but with the ultimate result being that we will build a team of consultants and professionals, which is, I think, typically the way it's done, that will help us through the project. So I hope that answers a little of your question as well.
It does, only to the degree that there is a difference between a firm being retained to act as an owner's representative versus acting in the role of CM on the project. And I don't know if facilities has determined at this point whether or not you're going to be seeking fixed bid contracts, CM multiple prime contracts, or another version of CM with which to manage the construction as it moves forward.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say no, we haven't worked through
Right.
all of that stuff yet because we're in such an early stage right now.
I understand. And it's important that at this early stage, these kinds of discussions take place so that we're not in a rush in the 11th hour to try to get some of these decisions made.
Sure. Yeah, no, I get that. And I appreciate that. Today, we'll talk a little bit, I'd like to anyway, Nikki's going to help guide the discussion about what all of us individually, what our experience has been and what we can add to the mix. So those are really good comments, Jim. I'd like to back up a minute and just for the record, note that we have a full group now in terms of the roll call. Jim came on at about 3:15, and also back up to what Diego had presented. He did a terrific job, really got thrown into the breach here because he's a brand new employee for us. He's an administrative assistant that just joined the administrative team. And Diego, thanks very much for that presentation. I really appreciate it. All things, relationship with the county, we go through Diego as the administrative assistant to help us understand what they need, going forward. And just a quick comment, and this is Diego actually, I always learn something on these Brown Act presentations. I had no idea that as a trustee, I have to have a poker face on when I'm in another meeting where I can't really say anything. So thanks for that new information. I didn't know that one.
Yeah, it's a lessons learned, unfortunately, and the library had to learn it the hard way previously, but that's another story.
Yeah, no, we've gone through that gauntlet.
Yes.
So this moves us down, unless there are other comments from people on the last segment regarding the Brown Act. And it sounds like maybe not. For unfinished business, there is none. So that gets us down into new business. And what you see here under the point A, development of committee procedural documents, is just a discussion. I think Nikki and I talked about this briefly when we were setting up the agenda of what the guardrails should be for us as a committee and sort of what we're trying to accomplish. And Nikki, did I oversimplify that, or is there more structure to what you'd like to do with that item?
No, and I think some of Jim's questions relate very closely to what the roles and responsibilities of this group will be. And being that it's an advisory committee to the full board, potentially I think a conversation should be had about any contract that would go to the board that's using the capital project funds. Potentially maybe this advisory group reviews that ahead of the board seeing it. So I think like what I was hoping this group could do is have discussion around what we see the CFD committee roles and responsibilities to look like, so that we can like write those documents up like you would for any pretty much like oversight or governing body. So it's more clear as to like what you're committing to as a committee, basically.
So with that background, oh, go ahead, Kim.
No, I'm listening. I'm taking it in.
Oh no, that was Kim, Jim. So
okay.
What's the best way to? Do you want us to raise our hands with Zoom or just raise them in the picture so you can see? I don't know what your protocol is.
Generally, with this small group, with me as a chair, I can see a hand go up and recognize the person. So, and I saw your hand go up there for a minute. Was that the only question that you had?
No, I do have a question. I guess I'm trying to understand a little bit more the differences between the facilities committee, I think that's their full name, and this committee. From what I could see, this committee is a standing committee. It wasn't clear to me that maybe it's called Capital Facilities Committee. It wasn't clear it was a standing committee. And I couldn't find its agendas or minutes on the website, but maybe I wasn't looking in the right place.
If you go to the Board of Trustees page on the website, you'll see a listing of all the meetings that are upcoming. And I think we're doing a pretty good job. And I know you didn't know exactly where to look, but as a library, I think we're doing a pretty good job of getting all the agendas up there, including some of the old ones if you're interested. But usually, am I right about that? Do this by memory.
Well, the facilities committee is ad hoc, so their work doesn't fall under the Brown Act requirements. So they don't have like regularly scheduled meetings. It's based on like the scope of work, which their scope is to like focus on the building projects themselves. So again, like I think we need to define in the roles and responsibilities of this group. If let's say there's down the road, we do RFPs around hiring certain firms to do work, whether that like if they're the ones that do the selection process and then they bring that information to this advisory group before it then goes to the full board. But the facilities was developed as ad hoc largely because a lot of the decisions that are going to have to be made may have to happen quickly. And it's more difficult to pull together the standing committee with posting agendas and all of that around that work. But again, like they're an advisory group as well. Everything would still have to go to the full board, be able to be reviewed by, the public as well as public comment and all of that.
So I guess what I'm saying is I think it'll be helpful to understand their scope and our scope and what the differences are. And if there is something that is in both of our scopes, does it come, is it the flow, is it from them to us, to the Board of Trustees? And the reason I ask is because I wasn't sure, and maybe this has already happened, there was discussion of 3 levels of amounts of dollar value of work to do. And I'm still not clear if the decision has been made on which of those 3 levels and who's making it. And I didn't think it was this committee, and I thought maybe it was the facilities committee, but then I would just say that that's the kind of meeting that the public should probably see. But anyway, So, but maybe you can even let me, is that a decision that's already been made between those three amounts, or is that still in the future?
Yeah, when those 3 amounts were proposed to us by ARG, it was to get a sense of how much the cost was going to be. That first level, which was, had we taken the ballot measure at 7 cents per square foot, was just to be able to address the ADA compliance and accessibility issues, renovate the Bob Lucas building, and then other, like, I think the roof was included, but just like the basics to get us to ADA compliance. Then the 10 cents, which was the top level, was to be able to completely renovate and do the projects as ARG laid them out for us. So when we pulled the community back in June at those 2 different levels, at 7 cents and 10 cents, the numbers came in the same. So we took the ballot measure at 10 cents. So technically we're able to bond out up to the 24 million, which would be the 10 cents per square foot. The decision has not been made on how much is going to be bond out. And I think that's largely something that we're going to be relying on the capital project manager to help us assess. Like what are the estimates? ARG gave us these rough numbers based on like, schematic design, very conceptual, but we're going to be relying on the capital project manager to help us determine what is the right amount of money to bond out to be able to do both projects. And I do think at one point, Kim, you asked us about like bonding out twice versus once. And of course, all of the advice that we've been getting, and again, we're going to be hiring a municipal advisor to help us with this as well, is to try to do it once if possible, because it saves you a lot of administrative costs and other things like that. So nothing has been decided yet. But again, that's why at the same time as we're trying to hire these 2 RFPs that you guys are going to be discussing today, we also were hiring the capital project manager so that we have a good sense of what the cost estimating looks like before we go out and issue bonds.
But the scope of work is not how much of all of the different projects to do. Because I know that I could swear there were 3, and I thought one had extra stuff for a separate community. I thought there were 3 levels, but
technically 4, I think. There was the absolute like lowest level, which came in, I think around 11 million, correct me if I'm wrong, Terry, that was just to deal with the ADA compliance, the roof, and then Bob Lucas. The next was like tier 2, where If we went up to this amount, then we would be able to accomplish these projects. Then there was 3, and then there was actually what they called optional. So really but again, ARG, it's not the same as what we would be doing when we hire an architectural and design firm, So
the final decision on what projects do get done, is that the capital facilities? Is that our scope, or is that just the Board of Trustees scope?
I think it's going to be combined both with this group as well as you advising the Board of Trustees as to what that looks like. So okay. Again, I could see this capital project manager working with the ad hoc facilities committee, but also then coming to this group to present what they're finding, updating the CFD committee as well as the board. Because really their role is going to be acting basically as a staff person to oversee both capital projects, as their specialty and expertise.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, even though we're a standing committee, we're expected to be more of an advisory committee. And I don't think that we as a group are going to put the final stamp of approval on anything that we think is good or not good. That will go to the board to be discussed and so on. And I think that sort of maximizes the transparency that we would like to apply to everything that we're doing. And as we go forward, I look at this group as being a linchpin in the transparency aspect of what we're doing, because we've brought citizens from Altadena on board to help us through this whole thing. And in fact, one of the items that I put down on the purpose or the mission of our committee was to maximize that transparency. And we can go into that in a minute, but I do want to go back to something Nikki said. The $11 million that was mentioned initially about the cost that it would take to renovate the library actually came up from a report in 2018 that was done by a group called, I want to say ADS, I can't quite remember, but that was just a report that gave the cost for deferred maintenance. It gave the cost for stuff that was broken and badly needed to be fixed. And already a year or two later, that was out of date price-wise as well. So the pricing has grown pretty quickly that we need to do this up into the $20 million range based on just the natural progression of building material costs and so on in time. So there's a variety of numbers that you'll hear about what it would cost to renovate the library. And I think we won't know until we get started and get things moving. But it's good to know that we've got more than enough money to, if we need it, to get to the point that was prescribed to us by Architectural Resources Group. So this is a great discussion. We're getting into it already. And I guess I wanted to, go ahead, Amy.
It's Jim. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Jim, I had a very minor question more about protocols in our meeting. So why don't you go ahead? Because I think you have a question about the discussion that was going on.
Okay, so with this approximately $24 million possibly available fund if needed, how far that goes is relative to whether or not the costing and the bidding out is going to take place under fair market terms, or whether we are going to in some way be bound by having to adhere to Davis-Bacon requirements for the amount of wage that is being paid to the people that are doing the work. It makes a significant difference as how far our money goes and how the budgeting takes place.
And these are the sorts of things we need to relay to the entire board too, as well as we go through this whole thing. From my personal perspective, I don't have enough expertise in this yet, like you do, Jim, to ask those types of questions. It needs to come to us from the form of from folks like you, and thank you for being here, part of the group, and also from the contractors that we get on an administrative side. So when I look at our role, and this is just me speaking, this is designed to get things going, as a CFD committee, Community Facilities District, we need to form this district, and we need to figure out exactly how to run it in a very transparent way. And we need to have the proper vendors. And when I say vendors, I'm talking about the bond underwriters and all of the business folks that are responsible for getting this going. We also are going to need to get probably upgrade or have some sort of an adjunct to our accounting for the library as well. At least, do we put it all under one roof? Do we have a separate set of books for that, et cetera? And these are the things that we should get advised on as things go forward. So from my perspective, I don't see us, and then going back to one comment that was made about how do we differentiate between the facilities group and the community, I'm sorry, the facilities planners and the community facilities district group, is that we're responsible for raising the money or producing it under the tax guidelines that we have. And the facilities group or the board, whoever it turns out to be, is going to be responsible for spending it with the contractors who are doing the actual building. And I think that's a dividing line that I personally can see. It might blend a little bit, but at the beginning, to me, that's a good way to look at what our function is.
Yeah, it's important for the facilities group, though, to know and to quantify how much they have to spend relative to the observed deficiencies and the long-term maintenance of the finished product when it gets done. We don't want to go in necessarily and buy the least expensive or the low bid if, in fact, by paying a certain percentage of money more, we're going to get a product that's going to last a life of 40 usable years as opposed to 15 usable years. This is a lifetime facility that we have here, and it's got to be reasonably maintainable on an ongoing basis. And the products that go into it have to be readily available and not something that is customized only for a one-time purchase on this.
Good.
Okay.
Spoken like an architect too, with your.
Well, it's not just as an architect. I had the dubious distinction of being the first architect to be hired as project engineer for a major FAA facility. And so my role was to oversight not only the architects and engineers, but also the contractors and to negotiate change orders that were going along on the course of the project, with an understanding that I had a signature authority of up to $50,000 a change order. By having that authority, we were able to proceed ahead without having to take time to go back to Washington, D.C. to ask for more money, because in the negotiations and with the proper guidelines set up, we were able to save the federal government probably $250,000 on this project by being able to resolve on-site with my on-site staff things that needed to be done, where I was acting not as an architect from a design standpoint, but as a overseer of all of the parties that were involved in the project. And that's a big distinction between what an architect does, what a CM does, what a contractor does, and what a committee is trying to do to make sure that when we're finished, we leave a project that is going to be self-maintainable on an annual basis with an idea of what that cost is going to be, so that Nikki is able to budget on a year-by-year basis what kind of monies are going to have to go ahead for change out and maintenance of air conditioning facilities, as an example, let alone cleaning, plumbing, electrical, or things of that nature there. And so we have, I believe, the ability to bring to the facilities people a lot of balance between what they may think they're going to do and what they need to do in order to ensure that Nikki's job is that much easier down the line.
Yeah, and I think these are things we need to discuss early and often like that to convey that information to them. And Amy, how about you? You had a question? Did you get your question answered?
My question was really, it's very minor, but I was wondering, for our meetings, what is the function of the chat function? Is that an appropriate thing to use in our meetings, or should we just avoid that completely because it's not it's not something that's viewable by the public? I just wanted to be really clear about that before we go too much further.
Yeah, it's answer B to give you the Brown Act take on that. We should avoid from any kind of communication that isn't public.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
Kim, you had a question?
I just wanted to say, I do think, as Jim's brought up, it's really important to weigh in on the terms or kind of structure of contracts or agreements, what the features are in them. And I'm thinking back to some of the projects that we've done in the school district where we did initial architectural designs 8 years ago. And then for whatever reason, we didn't have the bandwidth to put the project, actually start it and bid it out and get the construction going. And in the meantime, the prices for all the materials, et cetera, had gone up. We had to go back and pay additional money to the architects because the cost had changed, regardless of the fact they didn't have to do any additional work, just because prices had moved. And that was the way we'd written our master contract. So I think just to Jim's point, there's ways to write the contracts themselves. It's not about approving individual vendors or relationships, but are the contracts written in such a way that you've got the trade-offs you want to either have better quality, better maintenance, things that are easier to maintain versus price. Just maybe it's in the base contract, not, in all the individual ones. So I think that is important.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And also to Jim's point, I did want to mention that I think it was task 6 on the RFP to hire capital project management is to help us lay out a maintenance plan moving forward. So that actually is falling in their scope of work as well.
Yeah, oftentimes the M&O people are left out of the decisions that affect the design. They're not aware until it's handed over to them that they are going to be given certain products, and they are products that they're not familiar with, or that they don't have a pile of replacement parts. They go under the Home Depot concept that if you can get it at Home Depot, therefore it's okay. And that's not necessarily the way that we want to take and handle the long-term maintainability of this facility. We want to put quality products in and weigh those. And as Kim mentioned too, I think timing is critical to understand that, are we on a 3-year plan? And that's going to be the drop dead on this, as opposed to being caught up in something where budgetary limitations did stretch something out 8, 10, 12 years in some cases. And the permits that were pulled 8 years ago are not reflective of changes in code that are occurring currently relative to environmental things and stuff like that. That all has to be looked at on this.
Agreed. And the way that we wrote the RFP for capital project management is that it will be for a 3-year contract or until both buildings are completed. So with full intention that this is going to be potentially 3.5 years at the most.
Yeah, good.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Kim.
So Terry, so this agenda item, development of committee procedural documents. So is there a certain number of documents you think we need to create, and who's doing that creating?
Well, I think it's not so much the documents, and Nikki, correct me if I'm wrong, we talked about this before. It's the putting the guardrails or the guiding rails, so to speak, for what we're trying to do. We just got to this whole discussion. There's lots of great ideas that are bubbling up, but they might be a little too early, or they might be a little out of our, not in our bailiwick as a committee, and we're going to help to determine those things. So if we go, and this is just me talking again, plenty open ideas, but if we go with that concept that we're the folks that are trying to build a community facilities district, which is a municipal entity, and we've got books that we need to keep, and we've got taxes that we need to collect, and so on. You all saw the document that I sent about the special tax liens, and when you read that, it really comes home about what all the work is that you need to do for this, and the eye that you need to keep on the procedure so that we're doing everything correctly. That, to me, was the goal. Nikki, tell me if I'm wrong, rather than making a book that had procedures and policies.
Well, I do think it would be beneficial to have many things written down in terms of not only like the role that you're serving, but some of the commitments that you're making as a CFD committee. Like one of them that we keep hearing is, operating with full transparency around all of the bond issuance process, as well as the financial reporting on that moving forward. Another thing could be around being as fiscally responsible and conservative as we can in the bond issuance process and the spending, or things of that nature. I just know that this work is separate from the policies and procedures that the Board of Trustees have, so I think there should almost be some type of I don't know if you'd call it policy and procedure, but documentation around what the commitment is from this committee as it carries itself forward, because it is a committee that's going to exist indefinitely.
I may, Nikki, I'm sorry, I should wait to be called on first. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, I think you're both correct, but I think as opposed to documents, this is really about reporting. So as we continue to evolve in this subcommittee to feed into the full board, with the charge, we're responsible for the fiscal oversight of the bonds, is to ensure that we are providing transparency through a series of reports. And as we continue to flesh out the details of what we are responsible for, what documents that we need to provide to the board, but also the public, as it relates to what information we had to make a decision, and also what those decisions were. So you can clearly follow from point A to point B the decisions that were made. So it's just, again, to that transparency, but it's documentation. But it's really, when you think about this is these are reporting requirements that we're going to put on ourselves, that is backed with documentation.
Very simply, it's paper trail. We have to maintain a paper trail that can be followed and can be evaluated. And this is where we kind of got astray with the Pasadena Unified stuff, and got us into the newspapers and got us into a lot of negative commentary, because we were asking for a paper trail and the paper trail wasn't 100% being provided. And had it been, it would have exposed some issues that we believe were valid issues, but ultimately cost a couple of the chairs their roles in the procedure. So as long as we are all in agreement on this, and because we don't have to worry about commingling our books with something else, because we're dealing with just the two facilities, our job is going to be much easier than it was on the bond oversight for PUSD.
And that's a kind of, oh, I'm sorry, Kim, go ahead. I didn't see your hand.
I'm sorry, say again?
I was talking to Kim, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
We should start calling you James, I think, and then her Kim.
Are there, I'm assuming there's other CFDs in California, and I'm just wondering if it would be instructive to look at whether they have a handbook, a guidebook, a procedure, something that might give us a jumping off point. That's an idea. I wanted to clarify though. So I think, was it Nikki who just said that we'd be existing indefinitely, or this committee would be? And that's because even after the capital projects are done, the taxing still goes on to contribute operational dollars, true? Okay, I just want to double check.
Nikki, when you were at South Pasadena, did they ever float a bond for any capital improvements for their library buildings?
Prior to Altadena, I worked for the city of Glendale, and we did not do any type of bond issuance or anything that I was involved with like that.
Okay, because there is a project similar to this coming up now with the city of Moore Park that I'm involved with. Okay. And they're one that we might want to look at. Also, not South Pasadena, San Marino, a number of years ago when they built out their new library building over there. We're talking about a small independent city with its own library district, not part of the county system. Those are searchable on the internet. Mm-hmm. And I think we wouldn't have much difficulty at all finding a few examples of districts that have set these up.
Yeah, my understanding from when Natalia, who is our previous administrative assistant, and I were looking, is a lot of the CFDs don't have a separate committee or like documentation or handbooks around it, but like we'll continue to look and see what we can find. But I think to Rushmore's point, we could also look at like what reporting, and again, that might just be through the CFD committee report that Terry takes to the board each month, as well as any other documentation that you guys are reviewing or seeing, and making sure that always makes it to the full board. So we could continue to do some research and then bring that back to the CFD committee next month if that works.
Okay.
So are there any other questions, or doesn't look like it? Nikki, let me start. When I look at what we're supposed to be doing, just based on the CFD, the things that we talked about before. One is to enhance the transparency of the way that tax dollars are raised and spent. And I think that that might have been what you had in mind, just ticking off the things that are the most important for what this committee is doing and getting those compiled into maybe not a book, but a series of guidelines that will help us moving forward. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, I think that's a good place to start, to build around like what the role is and what we're going to continue to provide to the full board. I think to your point, that's exactly right. So that if any decision is made by the full board, people can go back and read through the documentation that was again reviewed by this body as well. That's going to oversee how the bonds are issued and how that money is being spent.
So that, and then Diego, are you taking notes here so that you can start to organize some of these ideas into a series of guidelines?
I am, and actually, I'm not sure. Well, as you all noticed in our previous minutes, as compared to the Board of Trustees, we wanted to make sure that this committee had a bit more detailed minutes as to what happened. So in case someone was not able to see the recording, they're able to get a full understanding as to the actual discussion and not just wait for an action, since standing committees, although do have action, there tend to be more recommendations. And that way, not only you all, but the public is aware of the discussion that's being made. So yes, I'm taking notes, and it'll be part of the meeting minutes so that there's record of it for the public.
Okay, great. So our form is okay, a little bit of a free form is going to start in here, okay. And then the second part of our job today is to talk about the way that we would approach hiring two consultants. One would be the municipal services advisor, and the other would be the bond counsel, both of which have been, I know I've heard many times that these are the first two that you want to hire and get in place because they can add much to your body of knowledge about how to proceed after that. So we would love to be in a position to have teed up some people that we talk to, or maybe we could even recommend, and we'll talk a little bit about the method for that. The bond or the RFPs for these positions, as you probably know, went out on the 23rd of February, and they're due back on the 1st of April. So we've got a window here in which to work. And when we kind of switch over to that direction a little bit, Nikki and I will talk about things that we as a committee need to do to make that happen. Is that fair, Nikki? Yes.
I believe, so providing a little bit more background, we did bring the request for proposals for both municipal advisor and bond and disclosure counsel to the CFD committee for review and approval on February 10th. They made the recommendation to the full board on February 22nd to approve them. The full board did. So that's why they were posted February 23rd. We have them posted on a website called bidnet.com, which is where all of the firms will need to apply or submit their proposals. The deadline is April 1st. And what this committee needs to do is have a discussion around how we're going to do the review process so that it will come back to the full CFD committee with, recommendations or whatever it is that you want. And then this group will then make a recommendation to the full board, be it at their April or their May meeting, depending on how this process works, on who this group recommends that the Board of Trustees award contracts to. So I think, like, Terry, you guys need to talk about how you want to see that process happen.
Nikki, if I may, is the determination, it's going to be twofold. On the one hand, it's going to be experience, obviously. But from a remuneration standpoint, are they going to be reimbursed on a fixed fee or an hourly basis for services rendered?
The way that we wrote the municipal advisory is that it would be based on a fee schedule. They'll need to provide their hourly rates, but they would be paid based on hourly work. Whereas the bond and disclosure council, the RFP was written that it's a flat fee, depending on per bond issuance.
Okay, good. So we got a flat fee for one. The other one is somewhat open-ended, but then again, that person's dealing with a moving target. That's understandable. It remains to be seen then whether or not the hourly rates that they are asking for are reasonable under the circumstances.
Correct. And I believe like in the review process, that would be part of what's reviewed.
Right. Fine. That's good. Thank you.
Yep.
So I guess I would ask
Kim has our hand.
Do we have a hand up there?
Yeah, Kim does.
Yes, go ahead, Kim.
So when I was reading over the January minutes, there were 3 people. It seemed to mention a municipal advisor, a bond counsel, and a CFD administrator. And so I know that there's 2 RFPs out. Is there going to be a 3rd one, or is that somehow a different track or a different timeline maybe?
Yeah, based on the research that we did after that meeting and speaking to people in the field, we were advised to hire those 2 first, and they will help us like determine what other consultants need to be brought on board. So like another one that was mentioned in those minutes was a bond underwriter. And again, I don't work in finance. I'm learning a lot going through this, but my understanding is that if you do a negotiated sale of bonds, you don't need a bond underwriter. If you do a competitive sale, you do. And most of the time they do a competitive sale. So again, that's why we need to get this municipal advisor on board to help guide us through hiring additional consultants to make sure that we do, the bond issuance appropriately. So again, when we were talking back in January, not as much research had been done. So it's, based on what we discovered, these are the 2 that we should hire first that will then help us move into the CFD administration firm, as well as potentially a bond underwriter and potentially others. So again, we want to get these people in place first.
Okay, no other hands. So I would suggest, and Nikki, help me out on this one, that we just have a few comments from everybody about what they see the role of the CFD committee is, and things that we could start to coalesce into a document or a series of guidelines that we can sort of go to going forward. Is that the way you kind of like to see this go?
Yeah, I believe we had talked about this group discussing how, because being that this isn't a standing committee, and if we have more than 2 CFD committee members together, everything would need to be done in the open format. I think we need to talk through how that process is going to play out, knowing that the proposals will come in April 1st, and then we need to start going through the review process. And I do think this group should be involved in who we're selecting for both of those. And again, then it would be recommended to the full board. But I think the group needs to have a conversation around how that's going to happen. So I don't know if those of you that have gone through RFP processes in the past have thoughts or feedback or suggestions on how you think that should be done.
Go ahead, Rushmore, sorry.
Great, thank you. So I think with 2 RFPs, well, typically any RFP, we lay out the criteria by which a proposal is deemed to be responsive, to meet threshold. Thereafter, the staff, following the RFP guidelines and the criteria by which to evaluate the proposal, will bring in assistance from other municipalities with experience, but also should lean on this subcommittee members, no more than 2, to be able to sit alongside the library staff and any other people that Nikki and her team are able to bring to the table that can provide value to the to review the proposals in each bucket. Which would also include, I believe, would be potentially interviewing, say, the top 3 candidates that they deemed after they go through their scoring process, as well as any kind of an appeal process at that point prior to bringing it to this committee. This committee then would be able to have the luxury of not only having the library staff reviewing it with the people they bring to the table, and also members from this committee to be able to articulate a set of recommendations for each or recommendation for each of the RFPs, and discuss the merits of the proposal. And then it be this body's determination to accept the staff's recommendation, Nikki's team's recommendation for each of those. And if at that point we can decide to just approve it and move forward, have questions, we can ask Nikki to ask additional questions. We can even bring those bodies in, those entities in the proposals. But I think the lion's share of the work, and that's why it's so critical for that when we went through the RFP process, development of the RFP and approval of the process, that the criteria by which we're selecting was vetted. And now we really rely on Nikki and her team, along with several members of our team. And I think we should request, participants and to help Nikki and the team to review those proposals. Again, no more than 2 of this body on each of the reviews, and then bring that forward. I think that would be what I've seen in the past from the reviews. So that's probably the most efficient way to address it.
If we could take it a step further, I would suggest that
Amy had a hand up.
Okay, sorry.
Well, I was just thinking about the criteria for evaluation and having some kind of overt rubric that I don't know. I mean, I hear, Rushmore, you're saying you think that maybe a couple of us on this committee would work with Nikki and her staff. To what extent does this group as a collective want to develop that rubric for assessing the RFPs? Because it seems to me that I'm happy to have, depending on who we decide to do this work, have a fraction of us work with staff on it, but it does seem that we should all participate in developing the assessment tool so that we all understand exactly what it is that we're looking for. I don't know what you all think about that, but just in terms of my other experiences with this kind of work, I think that knowledge ahead of time is so crucial for everyone to be in consensus about. I also wonder about issues around in reviewing proposals. Is there any conversation we want to have about unconscious bias? Any issues about the way that we engage with the materials presented? I don't know to what extent we would have any of those issues arise, but it is something in my other life that we have to think about a lot in terms of kind of training ourselves to be very aware of biases we may bring to the process of assessment.
I think the establishment of the criteria is going to limit the potential for that bias. And if we as a collective can agree to the components by which we are going to measure these individuals, exclusive of seeing them face to face or otherwise, we should be able to assess by assigning a 1 through 5 criteria or 1 through 5 point system for meeting each of these criteria elements that we have established. So if, for example, the first one is going to be number of similar projects completed within the last 7 years, would be a criteria. Another criteria might then be how much work do they currently have on the books to know that they have enough time to be able to commit to this product within the time frame that we've established. And then a few other things. We can end up with a 10 point or 10 items within the criteria, assign the numbers to them, total up the numbers. In the course of totaling up the numbers, however, the numbers may be skewed. They may be strong in one area, they may be weak in another, which then gives us the opportunity to recommend questions to focus on during the interview process. And then everybody's getting the same ability to respond. And it comes down to, yes, they're going to present a paper response in the RFP. And those paper responses, if they're good at creative writing, they can put all sorts of stuff in there. It remains for us to read between the lines and say, hey, this person is not really capable of doing what they've indicated, because some of us have prior knowledge of who this firm may be and what their track record has been. Now, that's where the bias thing that you're concerned about comes into play. So we've got to balance that off against their responses to the 10 criteria items that we've come up with. And I think that meets Rush's concern, it meets your concern, and it creates neutrality in terms of being able to measure why it was that we made a suggestion to the Facilities Committee and to the Board of Trustees that this would be the strongest candidate for the position.
I think we have a version of that rubric that you referred to, Amy, sort of a matrix of things to consider, maybe not perfectly married to these positions, but other, format that we can work with. So I see this group thinking that, maybe it's just me, but I think that getting work groups together that take a look at what the matrix is or what it could be, and using that as sort of a starting point for evaluation might be something we want to think of. Nikki, you said you had a version of this that was being used for the project manager. I know it's a completely different position, but you've got sort of a format to work with, right?
Yeah, we have basically a matrix that we put together that the Facilities Committee met to agree upon the criteria that we were going to be scoring on, to Jim's point. And then, like, the way we scored the proposals was a 0 or a 1. Did they meet that criteria or not? And then from there, though, that scoring, we were able to come up with like the top 3 firms, which we interviewed today. But again, it could be on a sliding scale, to Jim's point. But we did, as a group, come together to agree to those things, as well as what would give them a yes or a no, so that we're all on the same page as we approach the proposal review. Because like with that one, we got 10 proposals. So each committee member reviewed 4. You know what I mean? It's not like everybody reviewed all 10. So, but that way we all started off on the same foot, which I think is the right way to go, so that you're all approaching it the same way. And again, I think part of building solid matrix and criteria is going to be involving people from the field. Be it our accountant when it comes to the municipal advisory review, because I don't know what would set a better municipal advisory proposal apart from another necessarily. We can, to Jim's point, we can all be like, well, it's glossy and it's beautiful and it's put together nicely. Does that mean that they're the more quality firm? I think we need some expert opinions and help to help us put together the criteria, as well as like scoring and going through the process.
So what you're saying is that we would need an individual that specializes in these sorts of things, has some history in it, that could advise us on the proper things to look for, right?
Yes, and it'd be better if we had a few, that aren't applying, don't have any, conflict of interest in the whole process as well. I see Rushmore has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nikki. In the RFPs, we did articulate what the proposals are going to be evaluated on. What we didn't do, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nikki, what we didn't do is we didn't assign a number value associated with that. So if we published a set of criteria that we're going to utilize to evaluate, I think that we are somewhat stuck. I'm not sure, maybe we have to modify it, we can amend it if necessary, but certainly I think that to change or add a criteria, but I think that what we need to do is collectively agree upon a number value associated with each of the criteria that was listed in the RFP. And the reason why that's important is that you can have a budget submission, you can have experience submission, number of clients, things of that nature. But we may disagree on the point value. So, I mean, someone may say that, well, 80% of the score should be points should go towards budget. Well, some of us may think it's only 10%. So, I think that the general criteria that has been articulated is solid, and we're open to change. But I think that we need to understand, or at least articulate and agree upon what the scoring should be, the threshold within each of those buckets to help guide staff in making the decisions. I think that would be helpful, because I want to make sure that we're skewing the scoring appropriately to what's going to get us the best firms for each of the two jobs. So we don't have a number value yet, do we, Nikki?
No.
So would it make sense to the group to have the criteria for each of the RFPs that's already been published resent to the body? I mean, I'm not sure if I'm talking about Brown Act here, but maybe you can come up with proposed scoring for each of those. So we can collectively look at this at the criteria once more, and then assign a scores for each one of those, or at least come to some sort of agreement, because that would be helpful to address, what we want to minimize any kind of personal opinions, but also make sure that we are weighting it properly for what's going to give us the best options.
How many items, Rush, are in that list that you used?
I want to say about 5 or 6 each, maybe 7. Is that? I think it's about 5 to 7 each. Isn't that correct, Nikki?
I would have to go back and look at both RFPs. My focus this last week and a half has been on the capital project management.
Sure. But I don't think it's more, Jim, I don't think it's more than 8.
Okay, that's fine. So if we take those 8 items and then give a determination as to ranking of those items relative to its ultimate value in the process, and if you're using the 1 to 0 numbering, then it becomes a multiplier against the ranking for each one of those items. And we bring some balance to it, because it's one thing for somebody to offer us a price that looks really good, but beneath that price, it's not supported with a strong experience level or group of people that are doing it. Sometimes it's a less is more situation where it may be a small firm with only 3 people that can give a superior performance to a large firm with 20 people being asked to do the same task. And then the level of experience that have been assigned to the project may be, 9 juniors with 1 senior overseeing them, but the 9 juniors combined lack the body of experience necessary to make the determination on a uniquely complex project like what we have here.
Right, and that's why I use the example of we don't want to weigh the budget, 80 points out of 100, so that you've got to balance it out appropriately.
Sure.
I am looking at it now, Rushmore, and there's basically 4 big buckets, but I think those could be broken down a little bit more than that even. Like proposal qualifications could be not only purpose and scope, but then other things that we agree to as a criteria that you would want to weigh on as well. Another could be, just completeness of proposal and, other things like that. So I think building off of what your point, we could probably come up with 6 or 7 and then bring that back to the group for review, and then discussion around how you want to weight those criteria.
Right. Okay. So if we could go ahead. No, go ahead.
Because what we did with capital project management was, it was just a way to get through the proposals and score them. And that's why we did the 0 and the 1. And then we, based on those criteria, built questions for the interview and then weighted those based on what we felt was most important as a group when scoring the interviews for final selection. So there's that to consider as well.
Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of timing, Nikki, we meet next on the 14th of April. That means that all of the applications would have been received by then on the 1st, right? And then we've got a regular board meeting on April the 26th. So it sounds like we've got, if our goal was to get some recommendations in front of the regular board meeting on the 26th of April, we've got about 3 or 4 weeks to get all this stuff done, when at the close of the application process or the deadline for that. So,
yeah.
So, I mean, I envision like some work groups being organized around maybe a portion of the, I don't know how many, applicants you expect on all this. You got 10 for a project manager, right? So it seems reasonable to assume that you might get a half a dozen or up to 10 for the 2 positions that we have here. That would be a lot of work. And I know a lot of them, a lot of the presentations or the applications you might just dismiss, we might agree to just on the quality of the application itself, that they just didn't seem to have it all together, et cetera. But assign some people to take a look at a certain number of applications, if you will, and tee that up for a discussion on our meeting on the 14th might be a good way to go in terms of timing. Is that what you were thinking as well?
Rushmore, did you have?
Well, I think that's the best approach, Terry, but I would recommend that perhaps we have just a quick and dirty meeting prior to the closing of the RFPs, because I would not want the proposals to come in and collectively just, maybe Nikki's staff, I don't want any perception that we are now making scoring criteria decision based on the proposals that were come in, and not that we would actually collectively would be looking at proposals, but I think it'd be important if we could just do it, maybe to add an ad hoc to this meeting. It could be rather short, just to tease this thing out before the proposals come in. I think that would provide an additional level of transparency, so that we're not making decisions on what we've heard come in, so that we can skew it a certain way. I just want to make sure that that's done in an open fashion process. It should be done previous to. I don't know if it'll fit in schedule wise, but I think that would be the most appropriate way to go.
Yeah, and
good idea.
I think it's a really good idea, and that it will give the staff and I time to put together this matrix or evaluation criteria document. Like I mentioned, would also like to connect with people that aren't applying for the work, but work in the industry, that could provide maybe some insight as to what to be looking for in terms of what makes a stronger proposal than another when it comes to this work. That could help us like with the evaluation process as well. We'll call for a special meeting with this group, maybe in like, today's what, the 10th? In like 2 weeks from now or something like that, maybe a week from the proposal date. And then during that special meeting, also establish who's gonna end up reviewing at that point. But that will come together as a group to review the criteria and agree on how we're going to weigh things and moving forward in that process. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So this lands fairly squarely in your court to sort of get that part of it done. And feel free to reach out for any help you might need on that. So the proposal is, and I think we can just do this rather than making an action item out of it, just assign you to try to come up with a program, a series of steps that adhere to those deadlines and make a recommendation about when we might gather again in a special meeting prior to the next one that we have.
Carrie, Kim had a question as well. Ask.
So step one is step one has a few parts, but it is staff will develop a matrix and we will have a meeting and finalize the matrix. Then when the responses come in, I wasn't sure, Rushmore mentioned having a couple people look at them. And then I thought I heard someone else mention having 2 people look at different sets of them so that there's different groups of 2 people looking at different sets. And so I just wasn't sure if we wanted to flesh that out a little bit more, because I'm assuming that then has to happen prior to our April regular meeting. And then at the April regular meeting is when we will make finalize our recommendation to go to the Board of Trustees at the end of April.
I suggested 2, Kim. It could be 1. I think it's important, since we expanded this body to include 5 versus the 2 board members. I thought it would just, so it'd be nice to have at least one of us participate. Again, I'm not wedded to that. Could be 2 as a recommendation, as long as we have at least somebody in there, because we want, when Nikki's team, this is her staff's report, but I want to make sure that this is providing another level of transparency for what's being proposed to the CFD, and the CFD will then consider the recommendations without getting into the weeds of the scoring. But at least there is a comfort level by knowing at least one or more of this board is working side by side with Nikki and preparing the scores, and then there's that level of comfort there. So 1 or 2 either is fine. I think we should have at least 1.
Nikki, if I may, the RFP, when it went out, did it have a drop dead date on it as to the proposals must be in by this date, and anything after that is not acceptable? Number 1.
Mm-hmm. April 1st at 5.
Okay. And number 2, was it indicated to them in any way the criteria ranking by which their proposals would be reviewed?
Well, it stipulates in the RFP, and I can share my screen if you guys want to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, Jim, it provides the criteria which the proposals are going to be evaluated. It doesn't speak to necessarily the scoring that we're going to come up with later, and I don't think that's really necessary or requirement of this board to articulate the exact score, but certainly but we can utilize the criteria however we want as a body. But to answer your question, it did provide the detail of what we're going to evaluate, just not the scoring.
But it was indicated that in the event that there was something requested that was omitted from their presentation, that would in fact disqualify them or not?
I think just for technical purposes, there was something omitted, but typically when you submit something, it's fully responsive or not. But if you left out, a required document, that's tough. I mean, you didn't submit a responsive bid.
Okay, yeah, because what I want to make sure doesn't happen is that we get one of these persons that decides that they were in some way unfairly denied the opportunity to go to the interview process, and their basis for doing so is, well, we've met all the criteria that you asked for, and we're going to come back to them and say, well, you left out items A and B or more non-responsive. If they indicated non-responsive or not applicable, that's one thing. But if they chose to ignore it completely, and that is in fact what we're allowing as the grounds for justification for not letting them go to the next step, we just have to tread cautiously in that area.
Jim, to that end, well, if they're non-responsive, they're not even scored. So that's one. Fine. So they never make to that point. 2, there's never going to be an opportunity for them to cure the non-responsiveness. Once they miss once deadlines come and gone, that's it.
Okay.
Then it goes to the proposals that are in, and the opportunity to interview is an option. It's not a requirement.
Okay.
And if Nikki and her team are, as they're going through the review process, feel it's important based on what they've seen, they want to afford the top 3 proposals in their scoring to come in out of say 10, whatever the number is, it's their prerogative to do so. I don't know that it would make sense to afford an interview with an agency which met the criteria but only scored a 70 when you're dealing with, say, 3 agencies that scored 95 each. So that's there's going to be some level of discretion of the team to determine if they need to interview the top candidates or top proposals, excuse me, and then how many they think they need to in order to really flesh out uncertainty amongst as far as the final score to come forward. And again, it's just because they submitted a proposal, just because they met the criteria doesn't mean they're going to be afforded an interview. And you know what, you may have an entity that gets recommended to be awarded the contract without having an interview at all.
Yeah, understood. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I would also encourage in the CFD package from our February 10th meeting, it has both of the RFPs if you want to review those. We have really detailed general terms and conditions that address all of those things. And it outlines the appeal process and all of that.
Good. So. All right. It's fine. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions? I'm just wondering, Nikki, if we can kind of summarize that. You're talking about another meeting prior to the next one that we have, right? To take that. Yeah. Okay.
But, yeah. So what I would suggest is Diego and I will reach out to the group I'm thinking around March 25th or 24th, 25th. We'll see what works for the whole group, where we'll bring the criteria and the scoring and hopefully get some weighing in from people from those industries, be it bond counsel or municipal advisory. We'll meet with this group, we'll talk through the scoring and agree to how we're gonna approach all of that. If I'm hearing things correctly, after that happens, I'll work with 2 separate groups. One that will review each RFP with the staff and I, as well as anyone that we can pull in as outside experts, preferably 2 CFD committee members on each of those teams. Then when the proposals come in, each of those teams will review, and we'll determine how many of each and all of that based on the scoring criteria that we come up with. And then hopefully we'll be able to bring back a suggestion or recommendations to this full group on April 14th. Is that kind of a good summary?
I would say so.
Okay.
Yeah.
If it wouldn't be out of line, I can recommend a very, very strong independent individual out of the county area that has reviewed hundreds of these types of proposals. That might be one of the people that you're looking at that would be able to make an independent qualification of the completeness of these.
Perfect. Yeah, if you could email that to me, Jim, I'd appreciate it.
I will do that. Okay. And
I'd encourage the whole group, especially if it's people that worked in these fields that are potentially retired, you know, I think that would be excellent, because I think this is a very well-informed, educated group, but maybe not on these specific services. And the more help we can get identifying top quality versus not, the better, you know?
Okay.
Okay, so basically the instruction back to you, Nikki, without having to make a motion and a vote, would be please form the work groups that you need with for the activities that you described, with a possible meeting on March the 24th or 25th of the entire group to take a look at the progress and comment on the way that we're going to do this going forward. And then the rest of the timeline kind of plays out the way that I talked about before in terms of getting it, you know, evaluated, and then before our recommendations to the board by the meeting on April the 26th, right?
Correct. If we can make that work, you know, okay. I do think one commitment we've made from the beginning of basically CFD formation all the way through the ballot measure is that we want to make sure we're getting it done right. So if that means we have to wait and take it to the board in May, then that's what we have to do. Okay, good. So we'll see.
I didn't know how much of a rush you felt or how much pressure you felt to get these things going right away.
No, I think it's more important that we know we did a thorough and complete job of reviewing and feel good about who we end up taking to the full board.
Okay. We started a while ago to go down the path of coming up with some core ideas or core goals of the CFD committee. Do you feel like that's been discussed enough right now, Nikki, something we can place on hold, or does the group feel we need to work a little bit more on that?
No, I think with all the notes that both Diego and I took, we'll do some more research on that as well.
Okay.
And we'll see what we can bring back. But I mean, if you as individuals have thoughts or ideas that come to you after this, you know, feel free to shoot us some emails as we're developing a plan, basically. Because again, the research that we've done, we couldn't really find much, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've been looking too. I know exactly what you're saying. All right, well, that brings us to...
Kim had a question back there.
I'm sorry, Jim. I didn't see you.
No, Kim.
Oh, Kim, I'm sorry.
No, not me.
This is a random question, but I saw that there was a Board of Trustees retreat and a presentation on debt issuance. Is that something that would be helpful for us on the committee to read, those of us who haven't seen it?
I do think that was useful. Okay. Yeah, it kind of outlines the whole process.
Excellent. I will do that then as homework.
And if you guys want, we can send you that link with where in the video you'd need to fast forward to.
If you would, please, that would be great.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
All right. Moving on then to item number 6. Or does anyone have any proposals for future agenda items that they'd like to discuss besides these things that we're talking about now? And I should add that there's always a chance if you've got an idea that percolates up later on, you can get back to Nikki on that, and it will be placed on the next agenda. So there's no need to do it right this minute, but think about that and see if there's something you'd like to add.
Do we have from the architect a point that we've arrived at in terms of identifying the work and the priority of the work that we're proposing to do over the next 3 years?
Being that we haven't, we're not even close to hiring the architectural or design firm or firms, I think that's going to be one of the first things that we're working on when we bring on the capital project management firm.
So then I misunderstood. So the architect has not yet been assigned to the project other than from a preliminary evaluation standpoint.
Right. ARG, who produced the reports that came out, I think in March of last year, they just did a design review and conceptual work for us. That's not the plan that we'll be working off of. I'm sure whoever we hire, we did the capital project interviews today. Many of them reviewed those reports, and of course they're an asset that we have them.
Sure.
But again, we're going to have to hire either 1 or 2, depending on how we approach the projects, it could potentially be the same architect. We don't know. Mm-hmm. But again, that's the work we're going to be doing with the capital project management firm.
And they'll be putting out the RFP for that architect then.
Right.
Right. Okay, fine. I wasn't clear on that. Now I am. That's good. Thank you. Mm-hmm. That helps. Okay.
And just to add to that, we did vet the comments and the plans that they made with public meetings, town hall meetings. So folks got involved and made their wishes known about how they'd like the library to proceed with that. So
yeah, I participated in the process. I
remember seeing you there. Yeah.
Right,
and we actually built that step into the project capital management firm's work as well, is to do another round of community engagement work.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
and I think the only, as far as your comment then for number 6 about proposed future agenda items, then I think the only finite thing that we have left to do is to clearly understand the relationship between our committee and the finance and the facilities committee, and who's doing what and how we're supporting each other. That might be a topic for discussion.
Okay, that's a good one.
Okay.
Anything else?
Nope.
If not, it sounds like we're ready to adjourn this meeting with an expectation that we'll meet prior to our next scheduled meeting, and we'll wait for Nikki to give us the feedback on that one. So thanks again, all of you who have just become new committee members. Really a good brain trust, I can tell. I really appreciate your comments. We all do. So thanks for joining us. And with that, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Okay. I second it.
Second, it's been moved and seconded. So I bang this order to adjournment at 4:55. And thanks everybody for your participation today.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Guys, good to see you.